Hey guys, welcome to another video. This is Dev One Notch. So today we are going to be looking at setting up a microservice project. So you might typically be running a project that is big and you don't remember if your server is down, right? All service goes down with it. That's maybe why processing a particular customer's transaction, you run into a use case you did not handle very well, right? The server crashes. So running a microservice gives you the ability to run those individual services in Docker containers. So when one service is down, you're sure that the other services are up, right? So all these different instances of the Docker can be running on the same machine. It doesn't really matter. Another reason why you might want to explore the microservice architecture pattern is it gives you the flexibility of tools and not necessarily focusing on the tools, but focusing on what is important for your business. So for that streaming part, if we are sure that using a Java backend will help us achieve a better streaming experience, maybe due to the various SDKs that might be available with whatever service we are integrating, then it will be better to run that particular service using the Java. And this is our use case scenario. We're going to be having a basic front end running on Next.js, two backend services running on Node.js, right? And an Nginx server. In the Nginx server, its duty is to route any network request to the appropriate server. So if we pull up a basic image of our server, this is an Nginx server that handles the redirection of the request to the appropriate servers. The front end can be on Angular, it can be on Next.js, it can be on basic HTML, CSS. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. Then the backend server can be running on Node, any kind of service you want to use here. But in my own use case, I'm running a Node.js server here, a Node.js server here, and a Next.js server here, right? All communicating with Nginx. So the Node.js server will know whether to communicate with, it can have a direct communication with this guy, it can have a direct communication with this guy. These three communicate internally using their local ports, right? But any network request that comes in, Nginx knows which service to route it to. So yeah, when this service is down, we are sure that this service is up, this is not affected. When this one is down, likewise. So that's the basic flow of what we are going to be doing today. So if you open up I already bootstrapped this project, you can have access to it using my GitHub repository, right? So I have a basic backend server here. It has its own package JSON dependency. In the dependency, I just have, Express installed. And what this typically does is just it has this URL. If you visit this URL, it returns hello from service 1. I just called it service 1, the first backend. So it's running on port 3000. I have a second backend service, right? Typically in Node server 2, exactly what is there. The only difference is that the endpoint is different, service 2, and when you hit the endpoint, it says hello from service 2, right? So this is a typical Node.js Express server. Then I have a front end running on Next.js. What the front end typically does is any other request that comes to our API that it does not contain this API service 1 or API service 2, it is served from the front end, right? So this is basically the three services I'm running here. Then on the higher scale, I just have my Docker Compose that spins up an instance of the front end. We'll still come back into this. We'll come back to this in detail shortly. So it runs a front-end service, it spins up the front end using the Docker file, spins up the backend using the Docker file, the both backends, then spins up the Nginx. The Nginx manages the connection between the front end and the first backend together with the second backend. So before we proceed, I would like to demo how these individual services work locally. So if I cd into the backend, if I cd into that, I can run a basic yarn start and for it to spin up. As you can see, service 1 is running on port 3000. If you go to localhost 3000, oh, we don't have a get route. So if you go to localhost 3000 API /v1 /service 1, you will see here hello from service 1. So this service is just, like I said, is just a basic Node.js server that just returns on that slash API service /v1 /service 1. It returns this response. So I can close this out and also cd into the backend service 2, and if I run yarn start, visit the URL, you see that service 1 is not running, so there's nothing like service 1. So on my route I only have /API/v1/service 2. So if I visit this route, it tells me hello from service 2. So that is for the second backend. Then we can also cd into the front end, and if we run a yarn dev, this is a Next.js server, so if you run a yarn dev, it should also be up on localhost 3000. Yeah, so you will see on localhost 3000 we are seeing our basic Next.js. So if we run this thing, if we were to run this thing as a monolithic application, and we have like a single Node.js server serving the front end and the back end, if one of them crashes, the users will not be able to see our landing pages. Every service will typically be down. So in detail, what I do is on the Docker Compose, as you can see, I am building. So what we have on the Docker Compose, I am building the front end, right? So exposing the port 3000, just did a port mapping to. If I seed into this, when we run Docker Compose goes into this folder and looks for a Docker file. So if you check here, you would see a Docker file in the root directory. So the Docker file simply pulls the Node.js image, copies everything we have in this folder into a source folder, then it makes that source folder the working directory. So it runs the npm install, npm build, and npm start, right? This is a normal route for a Next.js project where you have to build before you start it, right? If we're running, it's not recommended to run dev on production, so we're assuming that we're on production right now. So if we do that, our basic front end will be up and running, right? Then also we have like the backend one. For the backend one, we have a Docker file that also does the copying and installation, exposes it on port 3000, and runs npm start. We have the start command in the package.json that simply runs node index.js. So likewise for backend service 2. So in our Nginx file, we have the front end, the backend, the second backend, right? So in the Nginx server, we are simply pulling the latest image of Nginx, exposing our port on 8080, then copying the default.conf to the Nginx where it takes its configurations from the default. This image has its presettings, so we always look for the settings inside here. So we are setting a volume, so anything that is inside here is available inside here. So if we go to that settings that we set up, we'll see that we are listening on port 8080. We are saying any request that hits the slash route, whether it's /about or /home, whatever it is, you should do a proxy pass and route it to frontend 3000. If you remember here, we have our front end, right? This front end mapping to 3000. So that's how it's reading it. So it knows that it's going to frontend 3000. So, but if the request also has like /API/v1/service1, right? It does not matter what comes after this anyway. The important thing that it matches this. If it matches this, we'll route it to backend 1 3000, because obviously service 1 that we defined here. So if you go into our backend service 1, so if you go into our Docker Compose and check the backend service 1, you see we're exposing it on 3000. So that's how it's coming about. Same thing for the second service. So sorry about this. If we go to /service2, we'd see that if we hit on this route, it proxies us to backend 2 on port 3000. So with this, that is just all we need. So this backend one can be run using .NET, whatever it is. This can be run using Next.js, whatever front end you decide to use. But the important thing is that the Docker Compose spins up each of these individually into a separate container, right? So if I go back to the directory where I have my Docker Compose running, and I run Docker Compose up --build for it to build the service, then -d to run it in demonized mode. So it builds the images. It will take a couple of minutes. So yeah, everything is done building. The Docker image has been built and they are up, right? So let's, fingers crossed, let's be hopeful that things are working. So if you visit localhost 8080, you'll see we are seeing our Next.js there. If you go to our API /1 service 1, you'll see hello from service 1. If you go to API, you see hello from service 2. So these different containers, 1, 2, 3, and the Nginx. So the Nginx is handling any request that comes in. If it matches a basic slash and any other thing, it sends it to the front end. The front end satisfies the request. If it matches the /API /v1 /service 1, it comes in here. If it matches /API /v1 /service 2, it comes here. I think that's all. If you do have questions about it, you can drop in the comment section. If you have recommendations on how you do your own too, thank you guys for watching. See you on another one.